Welcome to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where we sit down with the people who give shape, texture, and voice to life on the North Fork of Long Island. Some are rooted here by generations, others arrived by chance or choice, but all carry with them a piece of the story. We talk about what's changing, what's worth holding on to, and the currents of history, both quiet and loud, that run through this place. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 125, we sit down with Richard Vandenburgh, co-founder of Greenport Harbor Brewing Company, one of the most iconic and community-driven businesses in the region. A longtime North Fork resident with a background in law, Richard took a leap into the world of craft beer in 2009, helping transform a small village firehouse into a bustling brewery alongside his partner, John Liegey. Since then, Greenport Harbor Brewing has expanded into a second location in Peconic and has become a staple of the local economy and culture. Beyond the brewery, Richard has worn many hats, from Business Improvement District board member to hospital trustee to political candidate, all in the service of community betterment. Today we'll talk about the early days of the brewery, the risk and the rewards of entrepreneurship, and the lessons he's learned from balancing business with civic life. So I hope you enjoy episode 125 with Richard Vandenburgh. This episode was recorded April 16th, 2025. Thank you so much for coming on to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. I'm looking forward to talking to you.
I appreciate being invited. Thank you.
Absolutely. So just to start off, you and your wife have called the North Fork home for over 30 years. What brought you out here?
Yeah, I would say I discovered Greenport back in the early 80s when I was going to school out in Ohio. I'm originally from Boston area. My best friend, who I met out at college, lived in western Long Island, Nassau County, but his parents had a place out here, so we would oftentimes travel back together and then come out to the East End on my way across the ferry back to Boston, and I would spend, some time out here after school. And in doing that, I ultimately, as I traveled on beyond school, I basically came back to the East End when I agreed to help my friend rebuild their house in Southold. And when I did that, ultimately I had the opportunity to meet my wife, Anne, who is really more of a local, I guess you could say, because she was born and raised in Southold, but her dad was born and raised in Greenport. He worked on commercial dredging boats and on the waters on the East End for a bunch of years. Her mom was a nurse for 40 plus years at Eastern Long Island Hospital. And even her grandparents were, commercial water fishing people, as well as I think it was her, I forget which grandfather, but actually managed the Bohacks when they first opened up out here.
Yes.
So yeah, she was the real local. But yeah, once I met Anne and in the course of building that house, really there's so much to the East End and the Greenport area and the North Fork that was just so similar in a lot of ways to New England that I just fell in love with it. And from there, we got married and raised a family. And that was wonderful. 30 plus years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And then if you could talk a little bit about your background, and then how, in terms of your legal background, how that influence your path into entrepreneurship?
Yeah. I pretty much, probably in some degree, suffer from being a jack of all trades. A little bit. Because went to school, was fortunate enough to go to college. I'm one of 6 kids, so I was able to go to school. My parents always kind of instilled in all of us that you can do anything if you put your mind to it, and appreciate and respect the sense of independence and community involvement and all that. So did a lot of different things before I ultimately decided to go to law school. Built houses in New Hampshire, was a furniture mover out in the Midwest, drove tractor trailers. And then I decided, okay, I was interested in the law and decided to go to law school. I was considering going into law enforcement. And when, after I enrolled in law school and ultimately was working full time during the day, going to school at night, I took a break, and then I had the opportunity to come up here to the East End to build this house. And when I met my wife, Ann, so at that point it was like, okay, that was a wonderful romance that we had, and we decided to get married. And I was like, I have to go back and finish law school, and she agreed to go with me. So we went back down to Baltimore. I went to school, law school at the University of Baltimore, and we finished up. I finished up my degree. But then agreed that we would move back out here to the East End, which was fine by me. Her mom was still alive at the time. So we came back, and I was fortunate enough to get a job with a local attorney out here. And that kind of introduction led to a career with him, Rick Foster over in West Hampton. And ultimately, after 30 years, my skill set was in construction a little bit, background, that area, real estate, law, and that practice. So I developed the practice along those lines. Ultimately, that afforded me the opportunity to meet a lot of different people and in the community, and I represented clients and builders and homeowners, and ultimately that set the stage for kind of understanding what the landscape was out here. But I guess, more importantly, the root of what led me, from what I was doing into the brewery was my partner, John Liegey, and I, who's my best friend in college. We always talked in college, usually over a beer, well, wouldn't it be fun someday to do, start a business together, do something together? And, that idea kind of was always in the back, I guess, of our minds. We stayed friends beyond school. He went into advertising and marketing, and I was pursuing my law career with over in West Hampton at the time. And, we would vacation and talk about it'd be fun to do something together someday, and was always kind of hypothetical. And then ultimately I came across the old firehouse on Carpenter Street that was, just about to fall down. And I took a peek inside, and it just really, the 12-foot ceilings and the old character of the building really just screamed that this was kind of a real diamond in the rough. And so that's what led me to, call John and say, John, I think I found the project that we've been talking about for years, to do together. So two incredibly supportive spouses with Ann, my wife, and John's wife, Betsy, who perhaps initially indulged us in this, kind of passion project that we had, but were very supportive. And, the ability to kind of combine my background in construction, perhaps my understanding of the paperwork needs, the legal needs, that sort of thing, the securing the licenses and all that, and John's background in marketing and advertising, brand building, were all kind of really a perfect combination of tools that we were able to use, and then scraped up enough nickels and dimes, and were able to buy the property, and off we went to the races, opening in 2009.
Wonderful. And when did you kind of realize that it wasn't just a kind of a side passion project, but something that could really thrive?
Yeah, it's. I think we. I have strong memories of us up on a ladder, because we took off the roof and we rebuilt pretty much a substantial portion of the building, and I have these strong memories of us up there and people walking down the street and, spotting us and kind of laughing, saying, "What are you guys doing?" And we would explain, "Well, we're working on building a brewery," and they would chuckle and kind of laugh, but ultimately we got to the end, and we opened the doors and we started brewing beer, and worked with a great initial head brewer who was more of a commercial brewer. I was a little bit of a home brewer, but we're embraced by the community, where we wheeled our first keg down the street to Claudio's, and Jerry Tuthill stopped the music on the clam bar and introduced us as the new guys opening a brewery in town. So we were really very supportive of, we were supported by the community in a large measure that way, where my wife was delivering kegs out of the back of our Highlander, to people. And so that ultimately word seemed to spread, and we were, I have to say, making some pretty good beer. And then we were discovered by people coming out from the city. Word got back to places in the city where next thing you know, we were being courted by beer distributors and saying, look, we can help you expand your reach just beyond the village of Greenport. And at that point, we really did start to kind of ramp up into larger production. And when we finally realized that, the demand is outpacing our ability to supply, I think that's when we realized that this passion fun project that we thought would always be kind of a side hustle type of thing really became a thing. And so it was at that point where we then were looking to expand beyond the original location in Greenport.
And I was just curious, did you know how to brew at that point, or was it something that you were learning?
Yeah, I actually, the idea was always there, and we had, John and I had always enjoyed, having a beer together and trying different beers. And so there was a kind of a fascination that existed, in my mind with the whole process and the chemistry of it and everything, because it really is a combination of creativity and science, which is really interesting, and the finished product you get to enjoy, So I did some home brewing at first. When we kind of decided this is what we were going to do, we really immersed ourselves into learning everything we could about it. And I mean, I can recall going to brewing association events where, you'd be in this room with some of the early icons in the industry that, like Sam Adams and other bigger breweries with people that have been doing this for years, Peter Cook and so forth. But and asking them, they'd be talking about, the chemistry of yeast propagation. And I can remember raising my hand, sitting in the front row and saying, so when you first started the brewery, or your brewery, what were the challenges? Had nothing to do with yeast propagation, but ultimately I was basically just trying to learn everything I could about what to expect, what we should be, focused on, and, what were some of the mistakes that maybe they had made that I should try to avoid. So, but, knowing that once we got to the point that we were buying equipment, and, these larger big vessels that are, 900-gallon vessels as opposed to the little 5-gallon bucket that I had used in my back of my garage, we knew that we had to hire somebody who was really more professionally experienced and trained. And so we hired our first head brewer, DJ Swanson, who did an amazing job for us in the early years. And
then you mentioned with the expansion, how long of the time frame between the opening at the firehouse to the Peconic expansion, and if you could talk about some of the hurdles in getting that location off the ground.
Yeah, it was, so we opened in 2009, and we really started to see growth. We began hiring, our kind of one of our first employee, other than we call our forklift our, first employee. But ultimately our first real employee was Justin Wisnowski, who, local farming family, and a great kid at the time, who became our salesperson. And ultimately did an amazing job getting the word out and allowing us to sell into newer markets and supply other bars and restaurants and so forth with the beer. At that point, we then, as I say, were introduced into New York City, and we began slowly expanding further west on Long Island. And it really set the benchmark for our ability to brew the amount of beer that would fulfill the demand at this location. So we really started looking around for another location, and we're hoping to find something in the village probably in about 2010. It was a year and a half, potentially 2011. And we looked around and considered the arcade, but, couldn't really make that space work. I mean, the location we have is about 1,200 square feet, and we recognized that we were going to need, more space than some of the locations that we considered in the village. The one great thing about the village is it has a sewer system, so ultimately that's a really integral part of effective brewing. But we couldn't find a place that was really within our reach financially. So had the opportunity to look at what used to be the car dealership in Peconic. The building was amazing because it was built in 1927 by, these two brothers. It's like, withstood the hurricane of 38, no problem. Really just a great piece of property, about 3 acres. And really the vision that we saw for that place really checked all the boxes for us. So we started, discussing with the owners of that property and through the brokers. And it took some time to try and figure out how we would be able to secure the property and do the things we wanted to. But we knew that, at the time, we knew we wanted to really try to keep it local and keep it on Long Island. So we began, discussing with banks. This, of course, was after 2009, where the market corrected and the banks kind of had their issues. And so ultimately, we started chatting with banks and started the process of trying to secure that type of commercial funding, which we thought would be as easy as it was when we first bought this property. But it proved to be really a lot more difficult. So I think the challenge became where we were in contract to buy this place. We had gathered up enough money for a down payment, but now we had to begin to fulfill what the bank wanted from us in order to get to the final, funding of the property and the project. And it was like, it was really an experience where the goalposts kept moving, and it was, we had to do environmental testing on the property, and they kept asking for more and different things. And we were, probably the darkest days in our history of the company were when we tried to, finish it with commercial financing. And John and I would have these calls where, I'd be like ready just to, call it quits, and he would talk me off the ledge, and then he'd be ready to call it quits, and I would talk him off the ledge. So we really were able to support each other through the process. And ultimately, that was the initial challenge. We were really rescued by John Costello, who ultimately, was aware of what we had done in the village. We were, essentially two local guys that were, had this vision, and we got to know him, and he was hugely helpful in offering us temporary financing to ultimately close on the property and buy the property. And at that point, once we got past that benchmark, the next thing was, okay, now we need to buy the equipment and we need to finish the inside and all of that. And so we were fortunate enough to have another friend who explained this method that where we could ultimately offer, shares, investors to raise the money, and we follow that process. And we have a wonderful group of investors. We have about 40 of them that have various piece of the operation, and they've been so supportive over the years that we certainly could not have done anything that we've done with the new location without all of them. So that was another little bit of a process where, we were able to secure that additional funding. And John and I did most of the work, virtually all of the work on the property, where we tore out the floors and, we put the drains in, and we worked on all of the plumbing, and side by side with the contractors for the next 2 years, was 2012 when we bought the property. And then spent the next 2 years doing the work and kind of coordinating the various contractors and dealing with the Department of Health. That was another big challenge because we're not on sewers in Peconic, so we had to put in a really expansive septic system. And then, of course, we had the idea for the tasting room and restaurant, which was kind of the second phase of that process. And navigating through the town of Southold with, the idea of what we were looking to do. It was, you were as much trying to convince them that it would it would be okay as it was, that met the various criteria that they wanted to see. So we had to navigate that. And again, I think, some of my background in law helped with that process. And we were able to, get to the point that we were finally able to open the doors in 2014. And from there, it's been just trying to navigate the path since then with all of the other little changes that have happened.
Yes. And I was curious also, I remember, I don't know if it was maybe like 2008 or 2009, within the U.S., there were a lot of microbreweries opening up, and obviously the Greenport Harbor Brewery was 2009, but what do you think sets Greenport Harbor Brewery apart in a more of a crowded market? But would you say that out here there's not like there's as many other breweries, but if you go further west, there's more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. When we opened up in 2009, we really weren't, I guess, dialed into, where was the state of craft beer in general. We knew that we wanted to, quite simplistically, brew beer that we wanted to drink, so that was kind of the baseline business model, and share that with fans and friends and so forth. But at the time, there were only about 138 breweries in New York State. As our history continued from 2009 up to the present, I was fortunate enough to serve in the role of leadership for the New York State Brewers Association. Ultimately, became president of the association a couple of years ago. I finished my term. But there were only 138 breweries in New York State at the time, and there were probably about 1,200 nationwide. That explosion definitely happened, in 2009, where it really took off. And today, there's over 530 breweries in New York State. There's 60 on Long Island, and there's close to 10,000 nationwide. So, the craft brewing experience really took off. We were fortunate enough where we were out here on the East End, where really the closest brewery that was, if you wanted to call them competition, you could, but it was really Blue Point over in Patchogue. And honestly, those guys were instrumental as well. There's so many people that helped us on our path, on our journey. Mark Burford, Pete Cotter were two guys that, we reached out to and we said, hey guys, we're thinking about opening a brewery, in Greenport. And they were like, sure, what do you need? What do you want to know? And we spent many hours with them, talking through what might be the challenges or hurdles and the things that we needed to do and not do. They sold us initially, our first batch of kegs that we used. So they were so instrumental in helping pay it forward for us. There was a Southampton Public House over in Southampton that was operating at the time. But really, there wasn't any other breweries beyond the Patchogue location of Blue Point until you got farther up west. So we were lucky in the sense that, okay, we picked a spot where there really wasn't anybody servicing locally, the craft beer market. And, in hindsight, we really wanted to keep it in the manufacturing and the production local as much as we could. At the time, it seemed like that was going to be a smart thing for us to do. And we were proud of the fact that we were able to kind of keep all the manufacturing here on the North Fork. Unfortunately, as times change, you realize that manufacturing is a difficult thing to do in an area that, has really expensive property values and living costs are as high as they are. So I think we were lucky enough to start in 2009 where we were able to capture the recognition and audience that we still enjoy today, enough so that we're now considered, which always blows me away, as one of the elders, in the craft brewing market. After 15 years, I mean, in one sense, it's not a lot of time. In another sense, it's been some significant time. But I think, beyond the fact where our location was, we also were really hyper-focused on making sure that we brewed quality beers that were true to style. We weren't making the peanut butter and jelly IPAs and stuff like that. We were really focused on true to style with our Black Duck Porter and our other side, West Coast style IPA, and we have a house Pilsner that's like a German style Pilsner. True to form beers that were made that were consistently the same result when we would brew them, and that they were fresh, and so if we offered those components in the product that we were making, and then working with either a distributor that was reliable or our own sales team that was always available to meet the needs of whomever, those seemed to be all of the components that went into the success that we've had to establish ourselves as a reliable, well-made, consistently fresh brand.
Yes. And then also, just to change topics a bit, could you talk a little bit about, you've got involved in some civic roles with Business Improvement District and the Farm Bureau, right. Eastern Long Island Hospital Board. How did those opportunities come about, and what drives you to these public services?
Yeah, I think I start with my parents, who taught all of us siblings, make sure you know how to use your mind, but make sure you also know how to use your hands, and be engaged, respect the community, respect your neighbor. So I think, and really finally kind of, leave a place better than what you found it. Mm-hmm. So all of those things really, I think, shaped my earlier years. I mean, I was heavy into scouting as a youth. I became an Eagle Scout. That just fundamentally teaches you about engagement and leadership and, mm-hmm. kind of like resourcefulness. And I've always had that kind of, innate sense that, it's like the analogy, if you see somebody who's got a flat tire on the side of the road or their car's stuck in the mud, what do? You pull over, you help them change the tire, push the car to get them going again. So I think that, that type of engagement was always something that I really appreciated and respected, wanting to help and wanting to keep things moving forward in a positive way. So after I kind of got my feet under myself relative to my law practice, I found it was an easy step to say, listen, what does this organization need, or how can we make this better? Certainly with the bid, after being president of the bid for a number of years, it was that thing where we started the business in the business district in Greenport, and I participated in the early years of that organization, and I think I saw areas where we could improve what we do, improve what the bid does relative to the community overall. And working with people is really, really important. Being able to work as a team, empowering other people to do the jobs that, that they can do, that maybe they're not sure that they can do, but, ultimately empowering those people were things that just led me to be more engaged, where ultimately the opportunity arose and where I saw the need where it existed.
Mm-hmm. And then what about even with your time running a business? Was there any lessons that you've talked about some of the lessons, but just most valuable lessons when it comes to community leadership, possibly?
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities, really. I mean, you have to understand, I think, as a business owner, you have to understand what the landscape is. You have to be clear in terms of what the goal is that you're trying to achieve. You have to have a grasp in terms of the resources, the talent and expertise that you have that you can work with. And you have to be flexible in terms of understanding that, well, if the goal is one thing, the path to that goal may not necessarily be a straight line, mm-hmm. but that you really can't lose sight of the goal, and you may have to adjust your approach, but making sure that you're persevering to that goal. And then on top of that, you have to make sure that you're communicating clearly to those that you're working with and those that are, ultimately going to be the beneficiaries of that goal, as to why you're pursuing that goal and the risks and challenges and benefits that you may face in getting there. But, reassuring people, not necessarily, it's appreciating the fear of failure, but not necessarily shrinking in the face of setbacks to getting mm-hmm. there. And, I think there's a huge similarity to that, the lessons I've have absolutely learned in the 15 years of running the brewery that play exactly in the same sense in community leadership, governmental engagement. Those same lessons and those same principles are really very similar.
Yes. And then could you talk about a few years ago you ran for mayor of Greenport. Yeah. What inspired you to take on this step into politics?
Yeah, that was an interesting time in my life. I think I had reached a point not only in my career as an attorney. I mean, I had essentially kind of stepped back from practicing full time. I was full time working with a brewery, but I think I reached a point in my life where after 30-ish years, in the community, seeing kind of the changes that were happening, recognizing some of the pressures that were coming to bear upon the village in different ways. Unfortunately, having experienced a fair amount of dysfunction in terms of the governmental leadership, a lot of great people work in and for the village and around the village, but just there were definitely things that I viewed that needed to be changed and needed to be corrected. And we needed to really prepare more for the coming years and the trends that you could see that were happening. And so I felt as though I had enough of a connection, with the village and certainly through the business improvement district and, the initiatives that we were able to employ with other great people and, building the parklets during COVID and other things that we've done to kind of really unify our business community as what I believe is an integral part of our village overall. And so I saw things and knew and had confidence in my skills as a person who's an organized person, somebody who I think is can communicate clearly with others, can work as a team member, working with other people, finding consensus to address concerns and varying points of view. I felt like I had all of the requisite skills to do that and was really excited and committed to, making that part of my next chapter in my journey. But I had, there were limitations where I did not have a full-time residence in the village. I looked around for an affordable, place to buy or to rent. At the time, even that was going to really be difficult. I didn't have the resources to do that. I still had to pay my mortgage on my other properties. I still had to pay real estate taxes on my other properties. So it was one of those things where I had to find a way to try and bridge that gap. And there were some, local loud voices that found that to be a real offense that I didn't actually, really truly live in the village. And so for that reason, whatever I believed I could have brought to the village was not enough to get past that. And ultimately, the other guy won.
Yeah. And what did you learn from the campaign experience kind of after thinking about it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I had never really run for a public office before. Mm-hmm. And I think, politics can be a kind of a dirty thing that you have to endure to get to a end result, a goal that, where you hopefully can do better things. So I learned that, probably going into it, I was probably underestimating some of the maybe more fundamental points that other people had about, who was I? While I didn't consider myself an interloper, having had a business here for, 14 years at the time and having lived in the community for 30 plus years, raising a family, all that, but not necessarily within the jurisdictional definition of what the village of Greenport was defined as. So I think I underestimated that being as much of a thing that people couldn't really, I guess, get past before they could look at maybe some of the assets I could have brought with my strengths and my skills to the village. And so, it's never easy to lose. No one likes to lose. A lot of people say to me now, boy, you really dodged a bullet with that, huh? And it's like, I guess so. But it's, I still have really a lot of mixed emotions about it, because I really felt as though I could have brought a lot of organization, resolution of some of the significant dysfunction that exists, greater accountability. The boards that we have could have really, I think we could have done some great things to enhance and preserve, housing, dealing with the real problem that we have where our young people and next generation can't afford to live in this area because we have so many Airbnbs and a lot of big parts of the community have been eroded by the stuff that's happened. And at the time, I was prepared to really take that head on and had some great ideas as to how we could preserve the authenticity of what Greenport has been, while recognizing that change happens. And, you have to embrace change, but we have to embrace it in a way that's realistic, provided that we're communicating that clearly to all involved. So learned a lot. I think I learned a lot.
And I had another question more about when you initially came to the North Fork. What were your initial thoughts of the area? And did you think it was going to, or even Greenport, did you think it was going to change within those 15 years the way it did?
Yeah, I mean, certainly no one forecasted COVID, right? So I think my approach is usually when I enter a room or enter a group or move to a community, which, I haven't done a lot of that moving, but is, you make sure that you're watching and listening for a while before you engage your mouth or anything. And so it was certainly at the time when we first moved here back in 1991, I was focused on developing my career and providing for my family and raising a family. And, so I was involved in scouts as a scout leader, and I was involved in getting, on some of the earlier boards that I participated on just to better understand what some of the issues were in the community. And then you begin to recognize the trends that happen. So I think the speed with which it happened more recently, has been dramatic. I remember clearly, I would represent people on the south side that would be buying homes, people from up west or the city or wherever out of state, and they'd be buying these big homes on the south side, and I would represent the sellers or sometimes the buyers. And they would ask me, where do you live, Rich? I was like, well, I live on the North Fork. And they would say, oh, the North Fork. I hear that's very kind of rural and bucolic and farmy. And I would always say, yes, it is. It's very, it is. There's no reason to go over to the North Fork. Please, buy your house here on the South Fork. And not that I have anything against the South Fork, but it was just, I recognized that what we had up here was for so many years such a great secret and such a wonderful place. And, and then, to see the exponential change that happened with COVID where, there were people at the time, I still represent real estate, buyers and sellers were calling me up, sight unseen, buying houses. And so, that really was part of what I think also made me think I want to get more involved in local government leadership, because you could see the trend. The trend was clear to me what was going to happen to our housing and what was happening to our housing. So, it's pretty remarkable. And then you just kind of hang on and, you hope that the people that are in a position of influencing what our policies are and things like that are going to have the courage to do the right things, and sometimes we're successful and sometimes we're not.
And then now just looking back over the past 15 years of the brewery, what are you most proud of?
I think I'm really most proud of what we've built, the community we've helped build or continue to build within the community. I'm really, really proud of, there's so many things really honestly to be proud of without sounding, too pompous, I guess. But, I feel really good that we've helped build a community and we've become kind of an anchor in the community in a lot of ways. We've worked with so many amazing people. We continue to work with an amazing staff and team. We've worked with so many people that have come through the brewery We've hired hundreds and hundreds of people over the 15 years that were the local folks, whether they're college kids or, somebody who's not necessarily in college who lives here full time, a local resident. So I'm really proud of the relationships that we've built with our staff and those that have worked for us and those that have continued to kind of move, through the community. A lot of people went on to become really great brewers that have worked with us, other small business owners. So I think, that I'm really proud of. I'm proud of the relationships that we've built in supporting other great organizations in the community. I mean, we work really closely with Eastern Long Island Hospital and supporting their various, drives and fundraising efforts. We work really closely with CAST and all of the amazing work that they do for the community, supporting them wherever we can. Surfrider Organization, the Cornell Cooperative, Long Island Oyster Growers Association, SPAT. There's so many different organizations that we've worked with that I'm really proud of the fact that we've built a reputation of being a company and a business and a place to go that really appreciates what the strength of good community means. And I think I'm probably most proud. I'm also proud of the fact that we took 2 derelict buildings, and converted those into asset tax generating properties that that receive taxes and support our community in other ways. So there's a lot to be proud of.
Yes. And then what's next for the Greenport Harbor Brewery? Are there any new projects or flavors in the works?
We're it's a great question, and we do have some exciting things that are coming up. We're always excited for our kind of our seminal events that we have. We, of course, in June, we have our Dog Dock Diving Festival, which is a great 2-day event on June 7th and 8th this year, where, it's a great family event where if you've never seen that, I don't know if you've ever been to a Dog Dock Diving Festival, but
no.
we have a big 27,000 gallon pool on the lawn, and we work with this company that brings in a trailer that about 20 feet long, and it forms a dock where then you can sign your dog up to see how far your dog can jump off the dock into the pool. And it's a lot of fun. And we've had, I think this is our maybe 10th year or 11th year. I've lost track, but that's coming up in June. And then of course we have our Oyster Festival where we celebrate on Columbus Day weekend here in Greenport. We celebrate our local aquaculture growers, and that's a wonderful event. We do a chili festival in beginning of February where we invite local restaurants, and now we're inviting first responders too, fire departments, to show up, and they compete for trophies for the best chili. So those are kind of the events that we hold regularly. What we're really excited about upcoming is we are converting a piece of the brewery in the Peconic location to be a music venue, where we're excited to have a space that can serve as an event space, like a special event space for musical acts and private events, private parties. We are going to launch that on May 3rd with a reggae festival that's going to take place at the new venue, and we're excited for that. There's more information on our website, and we're hoping that's going to continue to be a positive innovation for the facility that we have, because you have to constantly innovate in order to fill what the need is, while at the same time, trying to be faithful to the ability to, pay our staff a livable wage and meet, all of the other obligations we have, like mortgages and real estate taxes. So, it's constant innovation in trying to figure out what we can do to make things more interesting and more enjoyable for our customers and our neighbors.
Definitely. And now, what advice would you give to someone hoping to start a new business on the North Fork today?
Yeah, today is that's a great question, and I think fundamentally the things that I would suggest, and kind of similar to what Mark and Pete did for us from Blue Point in helping us start our business. Paying it forward is really, really important. The willingness to share your your knowledge, your skill, advice, whatever you can do to pay it forward, I think is really a valuable thing. So I would always encourage anybody who's looking to start a new business to not hesitate to reach out and ask those kind of questions, because I think there are a lot of people, most people are willing to pay it forward that way. Mm-hmm. And I think, that comes hand in hand with the willingness to make sure that you're seeking that advice and that input. Also goes hand in hand with just understanding the landscape in terms of what you're thinking about doing and where you're thinking about doing it. And kind of the more grocery list stuff is like, organizing your goals from the start to what you see as the foreseeable finish, trying to define your budget in terms of what you think, and a lot of this comes from talking to other people and gathering information, but defining your budget. And then you really should consider, from my own personal experience, well, how would I, if I had to, double that budget in order to, get to where I think I want to be. Gathering a team of good people and professionals to rely upon, that team of resource where if you got an issue or a question and it's not necessarily in your wheelhouse, well, who do you go to that, might have an answer or be able to connect you with someone that does? Staying focused on your incremental goals is really important, but also, again, understanding that, accepting the fact that you have to be sometimes pretty flexible in terms of how you reach that goal. What the path is never necessarily a straight line, but you may have to be flexible in terms of understanding that path may vary a little bit toward achieving what your goal is. And then really appreciating the fear of failure. You have to appreciate that, but as I said before, you shouldn't shrink in the face of setbacks. You have to keep pushing, persevere, and always stay optimistic. I think all of that was true and has been true for us. And can't underscore how much having a supportive partner, not only in business but also in life, is really incredibly valuable, and hard to put a value on how important that is.
Yes. And then now, just in terms of living and working out here and having a business, what have you enjoyed most about your time out here and over the past 15 or so years?
Yeah, I think, relative to our business, beyond that, even before that, as I said early on, when I first was introduced to the East End and the North Fork, in a lot of ways, it was very similar to where I grew up outside of Boston, and that environment, the landscapes, the vistas, all of it in terms of the heritage, the history, that makes it attractive. I so enjoyed being able to settle in a place, and I was incredibly fortunate to be able to buy a home and raise a family at the time. That has been a huge benefit, and I'm very appreciative and mindful of that. But even in the last 15 years, I think, it's an ongoing journey. It's like an ongoing path you have. It's like from the things I've done in my life, from, building houses to driving trucks to going to law school to practicing law. Every step of the way, it's been the opportunity to meet different people, hear different views, appreciate different perspectives. You learn from them. You see the good, the bad, and the ugly. But that whole level of engagement, I think, and that's probably what also fuels my desire or wanting to be involved in community organizations and affairs. All of that really is just such an amazing thing. And, so many stories that you can tell of different challenges that you've had, successes that you've had, failures you've had to, navigate. All of that's been pretty amazing. And while there are days that are tough to stay optimistic about tomorrow, I think innately, I'm an optimistic person, and I'm really hopeful and very focused on the fact that, as a community out here in the East End, we still have so much to enjoy and celebrate. We've got to get through the distractions and the kind of the side issues that pull our focus away from that, making sure that we respect each other, making sure we respect where we are, where we live, and those that have lived here for years. All of those things have been really amazing to be a part of for not only just the 15 years of our business, but for the 34 years that I've lived here.
Yes. And you touched on it just a bit here, but what are your hopes for the future of the North Fork and its community down the line? And it can even be if you want to touch on Greenport as a community too.
Yeah. Well, I think overall the biggest threat I see, and community is it literally means, it's a group of people that live in a place that share the same ideas and ideology and are supportive of each other. I think for us, what I hope for Greenport and the North Fork in general is that, we are able to preserve and build upon a strong community. And in order to do so, we've got to recognize where the needs are. And the needs are for our next generation, for the youth, to be able to live, in and amongst our community. We have to be able to support our first responders in a way that, they're not forced out. We have to make sure that, the farming families can continue to operate on a level that, is at least beneficial for them. Same goes with the working waterfront. We've got to find ways that are going to support the authentic nature of what our community has been for so long, and that, change is going to happen. Change is inevitable, but we have to balance, that change with making sure that we afford opportunity and inclusivity of everybody that lives here. So, that's, sometimes they can be opposite ends to the problem, which is, not easy, but I'm really hopeful that we continue to elect leaders of our local governments and state governments that have courage enough to recognize what the goal is and kind of follow the basic steps that I mentioned before about having the courage to not necessarily be influenced by the NIMBYs or others that push back on the things that we need because perhaps their individual wants are in opposite to what the community needs are. So I'm really hopeful that we continue to find ways to encourage our youth and next generation folks to have a place to live and raise a family and enjoy everything that, I've enjoyed in the last 30 years.
Definitely. No, it's important. And then I'd just like to ask at the end if there was anything else you'd like to discuss or say that we haven't talked about?
No, I really enjoyed your questions, and I think that, when you sent them to me, they really made me pause and think seriously about some of those questions, because in a lot of ways, it's interesting when you assemble the questions that you've assembled in that fashion. You really kind of brings you like reflecting on a period of time with a little bit more, thought process that was really enjoyable. So first of all, I want to say how much I enjoyed your interview and the questions that you posed.
Yes.
I think it's important to make sure that people feel as though they have a voice. And I think, the more that you get engaged in your community, understanding that what is it that you're trying to do, it shouldn't just be a self-serving interest, the reason that you get engaged. It should be really understanding that if you're going to get engaged, really following those basic scouting principles. You go into a place, you should do whatever you can to make that place better than when you first got there, when you leave, and I think just the only thing I would say is overall, I think everything that we do as a business, that I've tried to do as a person, is to make sure that whatever you are going to do, you get engaged to do it with purpose, and that ultimately keeping your eye on the ball of leaving whatever it is you are doing in a better place than when you first got there.
Definitely. No, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast today and share your story and your work within the community and having a business out here. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 125 with Richard Vandenburgh. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.